Welcome to the second week of the Rocky Star Sew Along. I'm excited you're here. I'm excited to start sewing this week. And last week we planned our quilts, cut all our fabric. Here's all my background. And here are my 32 diamonds. And this week we are making two units, Unit 1 and Unit 2 of our quilts. So in the book on page 30, it is the start of assembling the quilt. So we're going to make Unit 1 and Unit 2, and I will show those on my screen here so you see. And the thing that's important when you are making these is keeping your layout in mind, because you can't just pick any of the diamonds to sew with these units. These go in a specific place of the quilt. I'll show you what Unit 1 and Unit 2 will look like. All right, so let's jump into showing you what the Unit 1s and Unit 2s look like. So my quilt is as simple and straightforward as they go, because I'm only using the one fabric for all my diamonds. So like I said before, make sure you keep in mind which of your diamonds go where as you're planning this. So this is what Unit 1 is. We will just be sewing pairs of diamonds together, and you need 16 of these. So that's sewing all 32 diamonds together. Just making sure, like I said, and I know I'm emphasizing this a lot, but making sure you're sewing the right diamonds together. Like if I was making a 2-color version, which would mean 8 diamonds in the center of one fabric, and then the 24 around the outside of a different fabric, then I would have to sew those pairs accordingly. So I wouldn't sew one of my outer diamond fabrics to my center star fabrics. So just keep that in mind, because I don't want you to have to rip out any seams. So this is going to be Unit 1 here. And then we make our Unit 2 from 2 of our Unit 1s and some background. So after I get these all laid out and show you how to sew these, we will make the Unit 1s, and then I will show you how to do the Unit 2s. All right, here we start the first step of our first Y seam. And you can do it. Don't worry. We can do it and it'll be great. So take one of your pairs, and I'm just going to move over here and shift everything over. Okay. So this is one of the pairs of Unit 1. And to do this, you need some sort of marking tool. I like these Sew Line mechanical pencils, and any kind of pins you have, and a ruler. So I like to use a smaller ruler for this. This is one of my smaller ones. So put your 2 diamonds right sides together. You don't have to line them up perfectly yet, but actually I'm gonna have them like this. So I'm going to have them like this because I always like to start my seam at the point and then stop it at my Y seam point. So it'll make more sense when we take it to the machine. On this edge of your diamond, line up the 1/4 inch line of your ruler and make a mark on this end of the diamond on that edge. Then turn your ruler to the other side and do the same thing. And what we're doing is finding a point where we will stop sewing this seam, and that is the first of three sides of your Y seam. So a Y seam is not difficult. It just requires stopping before the end of the fabric, which we typically aren't used to doing. So take your pin, and after you have these edges lined up, pin right through that point where those marks intersect. So you can see my pin goes directly through that point. Then make sure your edges are lined up and pin at least one more time, maybe two. Then when we start sewing, we will start sewing here at the end. So our 1/4 inch seam here. We'll stop with our needle down at this point and then backstitch 2 to 3 stitches just to keep that all in place. And I will take you to my machine to show you that part. All right, I'm going to do my best to make sure you can see the right angle as I'm sewing this seam. But I am going to start by making a couple stitches and backstitching. Okay, as I get close to this point, I'm going to slow down my speed, and once I get close here, I'm going to pull the pin out, and my goal is to get my needle to stop at that point with the needle down, and then backstitch a couple stitches. Okay, I'm stopping with my needle down at that point, and now I'm backstitching. Now you cut your thread. And see how we did? Yep, I'm happy with how that is. So that's just the first seam of your Y seam, and this is all that the unit ones are. So I will press it now. I'm just going to swing over here to my iron. Careful not to, push as you're ironing, just press it, especially because these are bias edges. And I'm pressing my seams open. So I just kind of open it with my finger as I go. Use the tip of my iron also to open it and then push down. Okay, now we'll flip it over and give the top a press too. Let's press this corner too because it got flipped up for some reason. Okay, so there is unit 1, and you will have 16 of these to sew. And yeah, it's not too bad when you take one step at a time. This is exactly how that seam should look. So make 16 of these, and then I will show you how to make a unit 2. Okay, now here it gets even more fun. We have our unit 1 sewn, so you need 16 of these. Now we get to make our unit 2, which is going to look like this. So it's 2 of these sewn together with background triangles. And I have 2 different ones, so I think I'll put 2 of the same together like that. And then 1 background square. I will do this one. Okay, so our first step is to sew these triangles to this pair, to a unit 1. So all of these pieces make up a unit 2, and you need 4 of these total. So the first step is to sew the second side of our Y seam. So in unit 1, we sewed this first seam. Now we get to sew the second seam. And to do that, we are going to first flip over our triangle fabrics. So we need to mark each side of the wrong side of our background triangle. So line up the quarter edge mark on your ruler with the edge of the triangle and make a mark towards the 90-degree angle point. And then do the same thing on the adjacent side. And that point there is where we will insert our pin. So this is how it will look when it's sewn in. I sew this side together first, so you will put it right sides together with that side. And I'm just turning it so I can pin it. So take your pin, put it right through that point where those two lines intersect. Then push this side of the diamond away because we were just pinning into, or we were sewing right here along the side. So we don't want to catch our seam over there. So I am inserting my pin through the point where the seam ended, sewing these two together. And then it'll come out the back through the point where those two marks intersect. So this is the point where we need to stop sewing and backstitch, just like we did before. Okay, so go ahead and after you get that first pin in there, then you can line up these edges and just smooth them out. And I always do at least 3 pins. You can do more. I never think that you can use too many pins. So we will start sewing at this end, stop at this point, and backstitch. And you'll do the exact same thing for this one. So just like earlier, I'm going to start my seam by backstitching. And then I will continue sewing until I get to my 2 points. Okay, sew down as you get to this point. And again, I have this piece pulled back because I don't want to accidentally sew this side. So just pull it away and then slow down. And my goal is to stop my needle in this point. So I'm going to pull the needle out as I get close. Okay, I stopped my needle. The needle's down. Now I'm going to backstitch. And you can cut your thread. And there's that seam. So now we're not pressing our seam yet. I'm just going to do this next step right here on my sewing table. So you will open that up. So here's your pieces like this. Then we are going to flip this side over like this. And then pull this side away and do the same thing for this side. So I'm going to put my needle through, or my pin through, there's no mark on this side, but just put your needle, I keep saying needle, put my pin through the point where the seam ended, sewing these two together, right there. And then you will put your pin through the point where your last seam ended, which will go through this intersection point. And then just line up the edges and flatten your pin out. And then just adjust as needed to make these edges line up. Don't stretch your fabric, but just smooth it out. Remember, these are bias edges, so they can stretch, but just do your best to not stretch them as you're sewing or pinning. So again, I'm going to pin 3 times. Okay, now I'm going to start my seam at this end. So I always like to start my seam at the outer point and then work my way in to the Y seam. Okay, slow down as you get to this point, and again, I'm going to make sure that this side is pulled away from getting caught in that seam. Okay, that's where I want to stop. Now I'm going to backstitch. Cut my thread. And then the moment of truth, we're going to open it up. And see how it looks. And I'm happy with that. I maybe could have stopped one stitch before I did, but let's press it and see what it looks like. So like I said, I don't press just the one side. I wait till both sides are sewn before I press. Again, just open your seams up with your fingers. And then you can rotate it. And then once you get to this middle point, I kind of just push it to one side. Okay, now I'm gonna press the right side. Yeah, so I think that looks great. I'm happy with that. So if you do have a little pucker, it could mean that your stitch went a little too far, and you can definitely rip out a stitch or two and press it and see if that helps. Okay, so there's one side of my unit 2. I will sew my other side, then show you the rest of it. So here are my 2 sides of my unit 2. Now I can sew these 2 together. So put them right sides together. And let's see, no, I'm gonna do it this way. I always have to think, like, how is this going into my sewing machine? So this is where we will start sewing on this end. And here, this is the outside of our quilt. And this here is where we will mark for another Y seam. So make your mark on this side and then on the adjacent side. Now we will line up these edges here, these 2 edges, and then pin through that mark, the point where those 2 marks intersect right there. And then this edge should align pretty close. I'm just going to adjust it here. Line it up as best you can. And then I'm going to pin 2 more right here. Okay, now we're going to start sewing at this end here and then stop at this point and back stitch. Okay, so now last step, I have this, I already pressed this seam when I sewed those 2 together, pressed it open, and I have already marked this point here on the wrong side of this background square. And I'm again going to sew it to this side first. So we will put this side away from what we are working on. Get my pins. And then pin just like we have our other Y seams. So right through that point there, then through the point where our seam ended, sewing these 2 halves together. And it should come out where that mark is, the intersection of those two marks. Then you just need to flatten the edges, push this seam or push this pin in, and then just align these edges. So you will start sewing at this edge here and stop your seam here and back stitch 2 to 3 stitches. And then I'm going to flip it to this side and sew that side. Okay, here's the last seam of unit 2, last 2 seams. So I'm starting on this outside edge and I'm going to back stitch. Then just continue to the point where those marks are. And as I'm getting closer, I'm making sure this side is out of the way and I'm slowing down. Okay, my needle's down where I want it to be. Now I'm back stitching and cutting my thread. So that's how I want that seam to look. Now I'm going to flip it over to the other side, which is just flipping these 2 pieces of fabric so they are right sides together. And now your diamonds will be, the wrong side will be facing you. And I'm going to pin through the points where these seams ended. Just like that. So it takes a little practice to get the feel of it, but pretty soon you'll understand how to get those pins where they go. And then line up these edges. Okay, now I'm going to start sewing on this side and back stitch when you start. Slow down as you get to this point. Now I'm going to back stitch now that my needle's down where I want it. Okay, now I'm going to open it up here on my ironing table and see what we've got. Yeah, I'm happy with that. So I'm going to press that one. And sometimes if there's a little bit of a pucker, it will press out. But you'll be able to tell after a little bit of practice what can be pressed and what needs to be redone. So this is one of 4 unit 2s that you'll need for the quilt. Again, just kind of put that to one side and press it. There we go. So work on 3 more of those and you're done with week 2. Here's a better view, not so close to the camera. So like I said, work on 3 more of these and we're just one step closer to making our Rocky Star quilts.